Okay, well, we, with a bunch of other philosophers, are here in Malibu at Pepperdine, at the, what is it called?
Pepperdine University.
Pepperdine University. That guy is Tomas Bogardus. You might have seen him before. So yeah, a bunch of philosophers. We're doing a sex gender workshop, and we thought we'd take the opportunity of being in the same place to record a little response video commentary to a recent discussion that Sophie Grace Chappell had with Jason Chen about Sophie's new book, which I've forgotten the title of, helpfully.
Transfigured.
Transfigured.
That's it.
We
Transfigured.
haven't read the book. We've just watched the video. So we're going to respond to the video.
All right, good. All right, so what's the first timestamp?
First timestamp, 5:25-ish.
Okay, here we go.
In the UK at the moment, I think that the current UK government is absolutely abominable about trans people. They treat us like vermin. They treat us like a plague. And one of the ways in which I hope my book will make a difference is by showing people who don't know about trans people, and maybe don't know any personally, showing them that we're real and we're essentially harmless. We're not a threat to anybody. We're like the planet Earth and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, mostly harmless. And some of us are actually, what do you know? You might even be fun to know. So I think humanizing people who are trans is one of the main things I want to do in Transfigured, trying to help people figure out what transgender is by showing them that actually, as a friend of mine said when she found out I was trans, it's no biggie. It's not a big deal. Some people are trans, some people aren't. So what?
Yeah, that's well put. So I guess I'm not as familiar with what's going on in the UK. Can you briefly describe it?
Well, I think we've got a government which is desperate, which is circling the plug hole, which is going down the tubes pretty fast, and they're thrashing around looking for people to hate. And the biggest target, the biggest group that they want people to hate is people who are refugees or asylum seekers or migrants, three quite different groups, which they band together in their hatred campaign. So this government bangs on and on about the threat posed to, the supposed threat posed to the rest of us by migrants. And because they're crude, they're a government clearly hate. So visible differences are what they go for. And a lot of trans people don't, as the saying is, past. It's fairly obvious that we started out in one gender and are now living in another, particularly trans women. So we're another visible target. And so we get all this vitriol from a government that doesn't have anything positive to offer. All they have to offer is negativity and hate. And that's what they're doing, right?
All right.
I don't know, that I guess there's like two things here. One is the typical, very like left-right stark, like that government, politics of hate, hate everyone, like this polarization of the UK political context. I mean, he has every right to feel that way about the government, but then rolling himself together with migrants, what was it, asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants or something. These groups, because they're visibly, I don't know. For me, and maybe it's not appropriate when you don't have the lived experience of a trans person in the UK, but it just seemed really hyperbolic and overstated as to like the actual situation of trans people in the UK, where there's like a very high level of rights protections. And the thing that's really going on that's challenging trans people is this question of whether the UK moves from their 2 years living as a woman requirement to the self-ID. That's the thing that got rejected and thrown out. And gender critical beliefs are being protected there. Is that a politics of hate, a dangerous time to be a trans person and so on? I don't know. So I just, for me, that was my first reaction in the interview to like, wow, this is like really overstated. What's going on there?
Yeah.
And then of course that speaks a little to the, I don't know, the how much you trust the person going into the discussion.
Yeah, well, I don't live in the UK, and I don't know exactly what the environment's like, and of course, I don't know what it's like to be a trans person anywhere, let alone in the UK. So I'm not sure what sort of experiences Sophie has had, but it does sound like the actual political movements are relatively modest, just a return to the status quo ante. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, possibly on social media, it's true that because it's an issue of interest at the moment, there's
Yeah.
much more like unpleasantness or
Yeah.
mean comments about appearance or something.
Yeah.
But that's still politics of hate to describe that.
Yeah. I will say I have seen a lot of hate on it's on both sides for sure, and there's a lot of weirdos and mentally unstable people out there in the comments leaving
Online,
online leaving a lot of hateful, mean comments for sure on both sides. But I guess I would also say that something I've experienced is just whenever I voice concerns or objections or ask questions or raise arguments, I think that often my conversation partners who disagree with me are awfully quick on the trigger to start accusing me of like phobia and animus, and they like start psychologizing my views instead of addressing the views
Yeah.
at like the object level or at the level of reason and ideas.
Yeah.
Instead, I get this like psychological explanation of what must be going on with me, some kind of like psychoanalysis. Yeah, and I don't think that's very productive. It would be nice, especially as philosophers, to just exchange ideas, but
Wouldn't that be lovely?
that
And
would be
wouldn't it be lovely if our public intellectuals
Mm,
stuck to that
yeah.
role and modeled good
Modeled that,
behavior?
yeah.
Unlike Judith Butler's new book.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, because then it legitimizes it, right? If her whole strategy in the book is to psychologize the TERFs or whatever, or
Yeah.
the anti-gender movement, and that is seen as a legitimate methodology for an academic.
Yeah.
What must be going on in their minds? What are they
Yeah.
fearful of?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of, especially younger people coming up through the educational system on that side of the debate have not learned very well how to like engage arguments and give reasonable objections aimed at premises. Instead, what they've learned is to try to offer like debunking psychological explanations of people's beliefs. And
Right.
often what they reach for is, I guess you're phobic or hateful or you're a fascist or something like that.
Always the fashion.
Yeah, there must be something underneath the surface that explains this. Yeah, I would like to say that they're giving into like their, what's the opposite of like your better angels, your worse angels. They're sort of like giving into the temptation to psychologize, but unfortunately, sometimes I think that's all they know how to do. That's all they've learned. So yeah, we should probably do a better.
They need a richer toolkit, so they
Yes.
only ever reach for that tool when it's
Yeah.
appropriate. Or
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Next one is 808.
Here we go.
Probably not long.
Argue a line about trans people, which is trans exclusionary. I think there are people who do that in philosophy, probably in perfectly good faith.
Yeah, that's me.
I think there are also people who, even in philosophy, though I'd rather not give names, who are rather grandstanding are seeking to make some kind of career capital out of it. Well, okay, I'll give you one name. I think Jordan Peterson does that.
So weird.
So I think there are people who are, in my view, not in good faith and are using this issue to express their own phobias and to express their own insecurities, and in line with the rest of a platform which is very much in line with the kind of right-wing politics, essentially bigoted politics that I've been describing.
Okay, so it started out we were talking about people in philosophy. Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
what
it was people in
okay.
philosophy.
Some
and then
people in
you-
philosophy are good faith, are acting in good faith, raising objections in good faith.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. I'm
That's
glad
nice.
that Sophie Grace Chappell recognizes that.
Yeah.
Okay, but then there are other people who are grandstanding,
Yeah. Using it for career.
using it for. I don't know if it's a really shrewd move for career advancement.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Hey,
helped.
want your books to get pulled at the last minute? Want your colleagues
Yeah.
to hate you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason a lot of us are waiting or have waited to receive tenure before
Right.
speaking on this sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
These grad students who are.
There's not a lot of
but-
grad students out there like publishing in this area, knowing that it's a hot topic and a
Yeah.
sure way to get hired. Yeah.
No, it's true. So I wonder if it was odd because I thought that what he's leading up to is something like, yeah, maybe someone like you, that's good faith, but someone like me or Kathleen or who? Well, Alex, I don't know. What is it? Maybe Alex is good faith, but the women are not, because the women are saying trans women are not women. Like, I don't know. I'm only guessing. But the lead up was to like, there's only about 5 of us, so which ones are the good faith ones and which ones aren't?
Yeah.
But then instead of naming, I don't want to name names. Oh, go on. Jordan Peterson. It's like, wait, what? I thought it was academic philosophy. So that was a bit strange
Yeah.
Did he just pivot and be like, oh, I'm going to talk about something else because it's a bit uncomfortable. I shouldn't be naming my colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that was the beginning of like Jordan Peterson's public profile, I think, right? With
He's
the
a psychologist, right?
he's a psychologist, certainly not a philosopher. Maybe we should repeat that.
Yeah.
Certainly not a philosopher. I think a lot of people online, I've seen a lot of people treat him as though he's a philosopher.
Oh,
I guess I will say
see.
this, he does trespass into
agree.
philosophy quite a bit, and he speaks on subjects that are philosophical.
I see. So maybe his public intellectual stance is as a philosopher. And so then, and Sophie what had something broader in mind than just the academic faculty. I mean, it's just strange because that is what those are his people in the sense of disciplinary boundaries, and that I think was what Jason was trying to get at. Like there's this discussion, of course, going on outside, but also inside. So we've now talked about the right wing in the UK, but now I want to talk a bit about the academic dispute. I felt like Jason was trying to lead Sophie to the academic dispute, and that was why it was surprising to veer back towards
Jordan Peterson.
And I am very curious about, yeah, so who does Sophie declare to be in bad faith and why? I would really like to know.
Yeah. Who do we suspect is doing this for career prospects? That's what I'd like to know.
Why is that the claim
Yeah.
rather than, like you said earlier, taking these arguments on their face and engaging with them? Why? Yeah.
All right. What's the
Okay.
next timestamp?
1339.
Okay, here we go.
Those who are just outright abolitionists about gender roles, I think, just getting out from there and generalizing what I'm saying there, I think there's a lot in gender roles that we can have fun with, that we can play with, and that we can use to be part of our self-expression. Because I think it's a general thing about the various kind of roles and norms that we find imposed on ourselves, that we can go three ways with them. We can say this is all bad, I want rid of all of this. Or we can say a little, it's a little bit bad, or we can say it's all good and I'm happy with all of it, and I submit to the patriarchy, and I'm not advocating either of those. I'm saying we should go down the middle, we should pick and choose and say, well, we can do this for gender roles, do that, but maybe we shouldn't do that because that does look like a vestige of oppression, which we're better off without.
So this for me is a really common mistake in how people talk about gender abolitionism. And Sophie, you see there was going between talking about gender roles and gender norms, and maybe this is what causes part of the problem. He's trying to say, oh, but once you look at the content of that stuff, I think in a later bit in this exchange, he's then, yeah, the gender dress-up box has the feather boa in it. And there's, maybe we should have played that because it's like quite hilarious. He's like, maybe you're just feeling a bit boisterous. Maybe you're just like, these funny words to what does the feather boa show? But I think the mistake in that, in thinking that these are just fun sets of ideas that you can pull stuff out of and try on when it suits you, it misses the core idea of how the second wave has understood gender such that they wanted it to be abolished. It's absolutely crucial to that concept that the stuff is imposed and deviations are sanctioned. So, and if you miss that part, of course, it looks more plausible just to be like, oh, but dresses are nice, makeup's nice. It's like, no, we're not denying that. Like, if there's stuff that's nice and fun, like a feather boa, keep it in and let anybody have it.
Mm-hmm.
If there's stuff that's toxic and dangerous and damaging, like not letting people express their emotions or cry, get rid of it and don't make anyone do that. But it's like a humanist approach to what's good or bad in the gender box. Gender abolitionism means stop imposing that stuff on people on the basis of sex. And I just noticed both Sophie Grace and some of actually the like Louise Perry, I think, makes this mistake sometimes. I've noticed it in a few places where they're sort of dismissive of gender abolitionism because they don't mean what we mean by gender. They just take gender to mean all of the interesting and fun content of the two sets of ways of being.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not
right
what we're targeting.
Okay, so there are certain kinds of activities or styles of dress or whatever that are associated with the sexes, like I guess feather boas are more associated with females.
Yeah, who even wears that? Stage performers, maybe drag queens.
I guess my daughter had some in the dress up box when she was younger.
Yeah. Easier to make it like sparkly, silky dresses or something versus
Yeah, but
So-
I guess what you're saying is from the perspective of second wave feminism, we have not yet talked about gender yet because you haven't yet mentioned any norms
Right.
or sanctions or norms that are policed or enforced or imposed. So far, you're just talking about types of behavior,
Yeah.
and that may be correlated with the two sexes.
Yeah.
And so one conception of gender is types of behavior or dress or presentation or whatever that are associated with the sexes. And you're saying from the second wave perspective, that's not gender
It's not
yet.
gender.
Yeah, that's not gender.
Nobody would be a gender abolitionist if all we had in the world was two sets of cool, fun ideas that nobody minded if you refused to take up.
Yeah,
If it's just, yeah, children are born, they all wear dungarees, but if they like, they can wear a sparkly gown, and if they like, they can wear this little cravat, but no one has to, and no one will be incentivized to do so, and no one will be punished for not doing so, and nobody cares. If there was just that, that's not gender, or at least it's not what the second wavers were complaining
I
about.
guess even if you saw a difference in frequency of these behaviors or activities or dress between males and females, that
Yeah,
would not be
still not
gendered.
gender.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to be imposed or enforced
Yeah.
or
I mean, there's
policed.
maybe
Okay.
some interesting philosophical borderline, which I don't like to speak approvingly of Sally Haslinger, but I think this was in some of her earlier work, that like statistical majorities can become norm-like at a certain point. I don't think she quite put it like that, but I think the thought is like, if all the women around you, purely for choice reasons, are nonetheless having children and leaving work, and that's somehow the conception of like, yeah, real child rearing means leaving work. You're not policed in this imaginary society, you're not policed in any way, but still just the bare fact that if like a lot of women are doing that, or most women you see are doing that, can come to be a pressure of its own kind, even when it wouldn't meet the strict norm definition. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think maybe that's a interesting hard part of the question. But that's like, we're not talking about a case like that, right? It's yeah. Like that's not what gender is now.
All right. So different conceptions of gender. I did just want to say this. I once did a symposium at an APA with Sophie Grace Chappell, and there are some philosophers that are really antagonistic and aggressive and hard to talk to and unpleasant. But my experience was Sophie Grace Chappell is not one of those. So I know in like philosophy of religion, atheists and theists rank each other by like how friendly they are and how unfriendly they are. And I would have thought on the spectrum of trans activists, Sophie Grace Chappell is like on the friendly end of the
That's right.
spectrum. Okay.
Yeah.
So although we're recording like a response video, yeah, I don't think does either one of us have any like negative feelings or you don't have to tell me. I don't. I'll just say I don't.
Yeah, no, you don't. That's fine.
Okay. Okay.
No, I think, well, I'll say, I think things started out very well between Sophie and I when Sophie was new and not at all aware of the politics.
Oh, I see.
So that's just a
Things have changed a
philosopher.
little bit.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so we had a productive exchange very early on. We wrote a article for Eon together
Oh.
with a
Oh,
a
yeah, I
debate.
remember that. Yeah.
So that was really like that would be really surprising now for a trans activist leaning philosopher to collaborate with a gender critical person, but we managed to do that. And then I think things just went a bit sour the more that he got into and aware of trans politics, or maybe he felt more responsibility to like represent his community or something. And so I think things got a bit more tense. We haven't spoken in several years. So.
Yeah. So I don't want to psychologize about anyone, but I'll just say that I've noticed for myself, like being on Twitter is not healthy for my mental state or psychology. And I find myself getting like grumpier
Oh, no,
the more I'm on Twitter.
True. Yeah. Me too. I'm trying to stay away.
So that could certainly happen. The more you're involved in these debates, it could.
That's true.
Could change
and
it.
you see a lot of, I mean, I can see why you could describe something as being very hateful too, because if what you're mainly seeing is people just making horrible, mean, petty comments, you're going to think, oh, that movement is terrible.
Yeah, like Twitter kind of channels that energy towards you, like intentionally.
This actually happened. I did an event recently in Fort Collins, and there were some trans women students in the audience, and great questions, like, and really cool that they came and they were challenging me. But there was one moment where one of them was sort of saying, like, your movement, like the kinds of things you say, all these comments about our appearance, we're predators, we're deviant. Like, it was clear that his sort of exposure to the online movement,
Yeah.
and then I'm there and he's seeing me as one of that. So I'm sort of being held to account for the gender critical behavior online,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is then like, that's a lot, right? Because I
Yeah.
know that behavior is bad. It's like, I'm not doing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's increasing awareness of how toxic social media is, but I'm hoping in like 10 or 20 years, we'll look back and find it hard to believe that anyone thought social media offered like a representative view of humanity. It's
Yeah.
just like,
Hopefully it'll just be like,
yeah.
what are those things that were like babies? Tamagotchis. We just won't have that anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so listen to some stuff about biological sex.
And it's not true of me. I don't just want to be treated as a woman. I don't just want to be recognized as a woman, although that's certainly important. But I want to be a woman, physically as well as psychologically and socially. And so that's the kind of interest I'm getting at when I say that thing. Of course, people want the recognition. They want the social space that's afforded to them by people publicly recognizing them as women or as men, as the case would be. But those trans people who are like me, they want a physical change too.
Okay, so I guess that was just some reporting about.
I think at that part of the video, he's been asked about the importance to trans people of the bodily change versus just the like gender ideas or whatever that is.
Yeah.
But I guess my curiosity was piqued there because that I want to be the thing does sound like a conception in which it's possible to become.
Yeah, and I guess later on in the video, we'll hear some speculation about how sex change may, at one time in the future, be technologically feasible. I remember the first paper I wrote, some internal problems with revisionary gender concepts. After having some criticisms of other proposals about revisionary definitions of woman, I proposed one and I was like, hey, try this one. This one's probably, it's not going to be great, but it's better than all the other ones that have been proposed. And it was just like, I think a lot of people, this occurs to a lot of people. I've seen it occur to a lot of people. And it's just to have a certain kind of gender identity, a woman gender identity or whatever, is to want to be a woman. So it's like just a desire-based account. And I had marshaled all this like empirical evidence of trans identifying children saying as much, like that's what they wanted.
Yep.
I think you find that kind of language in like Julia Serrano's work.
Yeah.
But I remember the referees didn't like it. They gave me a hard time. And so I ended up like dropping it.
But I didn't like it because of the distinction between the wanting and the being.
Yeah, I think because I said something like, well, it's pretty clear that, wanting to be a certain way isn't enough to actually be that way. So we're not going to save the infallibility of self-identification with this account, but there will be fewer edge cases or difficult cases because it seems to be that it's a nearly universal phenomenon among trans identifying individuals that they say they want to be the opposite sex. So anyway, it sounds like maybe that's Sophie Grace Chappell's view. Is it Chappell or Chapel?
I said Chapel, but I don't know.
Chapel.
But is that why you dug in and then wrote your paper about how identifying as is always never the same thing as being?
Well, I think that happened later when I think when I wrote the first paper, I hadn't yet realized that it seems to be necessarily true that every revisionary proposal is going to fail to respect everyone's self-ID. I just said like, this proposal doesn't work, here's why. This one doesn't work, here's why. And then I proposed one and I was like, it's still not going to work, here's why.
You're holding out hope for the
I was like, well, maybe, who knows, who's to say what philosophers will come up with. But then later on I was like, oh no, wait, I think the thing is impossible. I think literally no matter what the word woman means, it's one thing to be a woman, it's another thing to identify as being a woman, even sincerely identify. Yeah, those are just two different states and they can come apart. All right, should we look at the biological sex stuff? Okay, here we go.
This distinction between sex and gender, a lot of people will take stuff that you can change your gender, but you cannot change
How long do you
your
want
sex.
to?
And so perhaps the terms male and female refer to sex that are immutable, and a man and woman refer to gender, which are immutable. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah.
Not entirely, because I don't think either is immutable. I mean, there are certain markers of biological sex which science has not yet found a way to change. But people who are trans-exclusionary tend to say two contradictory things about sex. And the first is that sex is a cluster concept, So it depends on chromosomes, it depends on hormones, it depends on physical shape, it depends on physical function, and also it depends on social perception and on psychology. So it's a cluster concept because it involves all of those things. They say that. And if it's a cluster concept, then like any cluster concept, you know, it's a rag bag of different things all taken together. Well, clusters can be disaggregated and different bits of the cluster can be changed.
Okay, so we haven't yet heard the alleged second half of the contradiction. Gender critical people tend to say two contradictory things. So far, we just got one, which is that sex is a cluster concept. Okay, so when I heard that, I thought just immediately we should make it clear that sex is not a concept at all. So I think there might have been some like use mention errors going on there. When you're, you know, speaking out loud on a podcast, it's hard to make a use mention distinction. But sex is like
you don't want to spend all your time
going like this, yeah. So we certainly do have a concept of sex, and we have a word, sex. And you know, the word sex is a word, and our concept of sex is a concept, but sex itself is not a concept.
They're words about a thing, they're concepts of a thing.
Yeah.
There is the thing.
The thing itself,
Yeah.
Sex, that reproductive strategy, those two kinds of reproductive strategies, that's not a concept. It's not a word. Okay, so what would it mean to say that our concept of sex is a cluster concept? My best understanding of what people mean by this is it's sort of, again, a psychological account of like how and when we apply a concept or what we're looking for or using when we employ a concept or deploy a concept or use a concept. So you might say, like, how do you know that something is gold? You go to the jewelry store, how do you know where the gold things are and where the silver things are? And then you start listing superficial qualities like, well, I'll look for a number of things, you know, like it's got to have a certain color and be quite lustrous. And then maybe I'll test it and see how soft it is. I guess you could test its conductivity if you had a little voltmeter with you or whatever. So these are like superficial appearances that we rely on when we're using a concept. And I guess the same would go even for my concept of Holly Lawford-Smith. So we were in a room full of people earlier, but I only deployed my concept Holly with respect to one of them. What was I looking for? A certain kind of appearance. But I would never mistake those appearances for the underlying reality. When I use the name Holly, I'm trying to refer to the person who appears in a certain way.
Yeah.
That's what the name Holly refers to, the person who has the appearances, but the name Holly doesn't refer to the appearances. And in fact, if you were in disguise or whatever, you may have none of the appearances at all. And still,
Kate is smaller than me, so let's imagine Kate puts on a Holly Lawford-Smith
yeah,
exterior and then pops it off to surprise you.
Right.
You're not gonna.
yeah,
That's not. You were just incorrectly
yeah. I
deploying the
wouldn't.
term.
Yeah, so she's disguised as Holly,
Yeah.
and then takes the disguise off. I wouldn't say, "Oh, you were Holly before, but you're not Holly now." Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not the way that proper names work, and I don't think that's the way that kind terms, certainly not natural kind terms, like gold work. Something can appear like gold and yet not actually be gold.
Yep.
Gold may not appear to be gold, may lack all the kind of appearances you typically rely on. Okay, so I would have said something similar about the sexes. It is possible that when we're employing our sex terms like male and female, we rely on certain kinds of appearances. Maybe, like if you're just asking me to sort the peacocks from the peahens, I am going to use superficial appearances. But by no means do I think that, you know, what it is to be a peacock is to have the brightly colored feathers, because you could shave a peacock, I guess, or whatever. You could pluck a peacock. So that's not what it is to be a peacock. To be a peacock is just to be a male peafowl. And although I rely on certain very distinctive superficial appearances, that's not part of the definition of what it is to be a peacock. Okay, similarly with human males and human females, I would have thought.
I'm just wondering if there's two slightly different points here, because the thing that you're describing as the like confusion of things we use as heuristics or markers for this deeper thing that is sex that we're trying to get at. I think I might be wrong about who Sophie has in mind, but the only disjunctive like property cluster view that I know of from feminist philosophy that he might be thinking of, I think that's going to put things in the property cluster like hormones, chromosomes, gonads. And none of those things are things that are detectable. So that's a property cluster view of sex, where sex could be changed, right, which is the other part of the, it's a property cluster and sex can't be changed. That's
No, I think that the second half of the contradiction is supposed to be and it's chromosomal. I think that's sex is a cluster concept and it's chromosomal. I think that's going to be the second half of the contradiction.
It couldn't be changed because then his whole thing was going on to be like, but science can't now change all five. But if it could change the majority, then we should agree.
In the bit of the video we were just watching, the train of thought seemed to go from, well, if sex is a cluster concept, then it can be changed. But if I recall correctly, the second half of the contradiction is supposed to be sex is a cluster concept and it's chromosomal.
Oh.
And that's why it can't be changed or something like that. But I might be misremembering. Maybe we'll watch the video.
Okay. Oh, wait, so I think what I was trying to ask you is,
it may not be superficial appearances in the cluster.
What you're saying about it, the mark is not being the thing itself, that relies on superficially accessible things. And if the property cluster he has in mind is not superficial things, these are two separate ideas, right?
Right. So it could be that what we put in the cluster is not superficial appearances, but some sort of underlying reality, chromosomes or hormone levels or types of gametes or something like that.
You still, I think, want to say that's still not sex, that's sex characteristics.
Those are sex characteristics or sex traits. It's not something you can see with the naked eye, but it's still traits that are linked to sex. And I guess in response to that kind of view, I would just point out that just as we can imagine gold that lacks everything else you would have put in the cluster, unless you put having 79 protons in the cluster, you can get rid of most of the things that you psychologically rely on when you deploy the concept and still have gold. And you can have all those things that you psychologically associate with gold that you use to deploy your concept without it actually being gold. You can do something similar even with this, I guess, more sophisticated cluster concept view. You can imagine cases where you've got a male who has female typical hormone levels. And even, I guess, female
surgery.
We can have all sorts of surgical interventions to make this person look just like a female. I guess even if we had like some nanorobots, maybe we could change them at a cellular level and add some chromosomes, like delete the Y chromosomes, add the X chromosomes. You could do all that. And I think in these thought experiments, you will realize that you could still have a male with all those typical markers. I guess some people might feel resistance there with hypothetical chromosomal change. They might think, no, as soon as you change all the chromosomes in every cell of a person's body, you have thereby changed the person's sex. Because they might think chromosomes just are the definition of sex. Do we want to watch Sophie Grace Chappell respond to that? Respond to that?
Yeah, we should.
Okay. I thought that was a good response that I agreed with.
When you tick enough of these boxes, then
we could probably fast forward.
It's a flexible concept. How much is enough? There might be people who are supposing there's an even number of boxes to tick. There might be people who are exactly halfway along. There might be people who are who change in one of those items in the cluster, and therefore the balance in them tips, if it's an odd number, over from 3 to 2 to 2 to 3. And if you genuinely think that's a cluster concept, then you should view that with sex is a cluster concept. Then you should view that 2 to 3 to 3 to 2 moment as a change of sex.
Okay, here comes the second half of the contradiction, but I just wanted to say, I think that is right. I guess if you really were confused about what sex is and you thought it's just a kind of like weighted list, and as long as you have enough of the right items on this list, then you are of a certain sex. If you really had that view, then I think it's correct to say you could change your sex. I guess it would depend on the weightings. If you put like maximum weight on the gametes or something like that.
I don't really remember the details of it, but we were all in the early years, the gender critical people writing these exploratory kind of medium essays, because it was fast paced. And I remember writing one about property cluster views of sex and whether change of sex is possible, and arguing for asymmetry, that it's weird to have a property cluster view of sex because trans men and trans women come out differently on it.
Oh.
Yeah, which I can't remember whether it's because there's a different number of markers or because you can't change chromosomes. I can't remember the details of the argument.
It would be easier to change sex as a trans man, you were
I
saying.
think so. I'd have to
Okay.
reread it, but it was like, yeah, somehow the number of the traits that there was some question of whether you take it to be the primary sex characteristics that have to change or both primary and secondary. And somehow it was like there was maybe a different number of traits. And then one side got it easier, at least met the 50-50 bar or something. So anyway, there was an interesting asymmetry. But
Yeah.
channeling that mindset, when I was entertaining that's the right view of sex or whatever, because that is in the literature, and the feminist philosophy literature, not the biology, then I think that's right. It's just a game of however many of how high can you get your numbers? If it's 5 things to be a man, hormones, chromosomes, genitals, gonads, whatever, and then you can change everything but your chromosomes and your gonads, you're now 3 out of 5 non-man. Like,
You've switched.
So that's true. I mean, the problem is his holding on to the property cluster view of sex, right? He could not say any of that if he had a gametes view.
Well, so far, Sophie Grace Chappell has not endorsed the property cluster view.
No, but then why is he? Because that's the thing he's sort of harping on, and it seems like he's pinning his hopes for change of sex to that.
Yeah.
Like that's a promising account for change of sex.
Okay, maybe this is too charitable, but I think it's okay. This might be too charitable, maybe maximally charitable to say. I think what's happening is we're getting like classic philosopher behavior where we're just saying like, if this view is true, here's what would follow.
Yeah.
If you hold these two views together, it's a contradiction. As to what my own views are, I haven't told you. Like that. I'm just exploring implications of certain views. But I mean, later on in the interview, as we'll see, Sophie Grace Chappell seems to come close to a function view and says like, that's the way you should go or something like that.
Right, because he's then drawing this clear sex versus gender distinction.
I think it was in a conversation about other species or something. If you wanted other species to count as male and female in the same way that humans are, it's going to have to be function.
I see. So that's why that gives you reason to think he's not endorsing the property cluster view.
I think that's right.
You think he just thinks that's the gender critical view, which it absolutely isn't?
Yeah. I think
he's just it's
I got the
inconsistency.
Yeah, I got when I heard like people bringing up property cluster views, when I heard that brought up, I thought like this is kind of dated. Like,
yeah.
Because my impression was the same as your impression that like in the earlier days of these debates, when things were moving quickly, some people certainly expressed property cluster views.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think I myself might have been tempted by that, or at least thought it was like a live option, but I have since then come to believe it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, no, that's really helpful though, because I did think he wouldn't be talking about it if he's not kind of
sympathetic.
Sympathetic to it, but he might just wrongly think that's our view.
Yeah. So here comes the second half of the alleged contradiction. On the one hand, gender critical feminists say sex is a cluster concept, and then here comes the other half.
Saying anti-species people, alongside saying that sex is a cluster concept, they say that it's chromosomal. And there are well-known scientific problems with that. One of them is that actually a lot of people who are phenotypically male or female, in the most traditional and pronounced way, they sometimes turn out to be chromosomatically exactly the opposite of what from what they appear to be. So there are people who are intersex. There are also people who are phenotypically female, but genotypically, chromosomatically male. So for all those reasons, I don't see why anyone would think that it's more than a religious dogma to think that sex is mutable and that birth sex is what counts and nothing else. What is true is...
Wait, was it? It's nothing more than a religious dogma to think that sex is mutable?
Oh,
surely what was meant there was immutable.
Yeah, surely.
Okay.
Go back in a time machine and alter the sex that you were assigned at birth. That's true. But if thanks to the cluster concept, the posts are at 5 criteria,
okay, this is a little repetitive.
Change just one of them, then science improves and it can change 2. Then science improves a bit more, and now it can change 3 out of 5 with cluster concepts.
Yeah, this is just an expansion on the previous.
Point, if you really think that sex is a cluster concept, then you ought to say, well, it's no longer true that sex is immutable. That's changed because science has advanced.
Do you want to comment on any of that? It was largely repetitive, but at least we saw the two halves of the alleged contradiction. But the objection to the view that sex is determined by chromosomes there was there are some humans that are phenotypically female, but genetically male, or something like that.
Which we probably would not think is an objection.
Yeah, I get, well, if I'm going to do the classic philosopher move, if I held the view that sex is determined by chromosomes and sex just is defined in terms of chromosomes, I guess what I would say in those cases is if the person's XY, it's a male
with
who
unusual
appears to
phenotype.
be female. Yeah,
Yes.
appears to be female.
Yes, and vice versa. If your
Yeah.
view of sex for some strange reason was just whatever somebody looks like,
Yeah.
fine. Then that's a female with a male with a
Yeah.
male-like chromosome structure or something like.
Yeah.
That's not a very plausible view of sex, right?
I think there are much better objections to the chromosomal view, and we're going to hear some in a second because I think this interviewer is going to ask about other species, and
Yes,
then that's going to occasion the thought in Professor Grace Chappell. I'm not on a first name basis. So
Yeah, no, your naming is getting more and more student-like as we go through the video.
I don't want to just say Sophie. Like, I don't. We're
You're
not.
like
We're not
Sophie
buddies.
and he, and then you're like professor of the illustrious
Open University. I didn't mean to say it's not illustrious. I just meant like imagine the full title. Okay. So anyway, yeah, there's better objections to the chromosomal view, but just saying like, well, if that view were true, there could be people who appear to be female but are really male. That's not a good objection.
No.
Yeah, I guess I would have thought, isn't that good? Can't on virtually any view that's going to be the case, right? Whose view is it that to be female just is to appear female?
Surely.
And what does
one's.
female mean there when you say appear to be female? What do you mean?
Right.
Just to have a certain body shape? Yeah, that's certainly not Professor Grace Chappell's view.
No, and it would be a strange view.
Yeah.
That would count a lot of the wrong people. It would be counterintuitive for a lot of the way it classifies people.
Yeah.
There's going to be like chubby men with hourglass figures, or like, I don't know, boobs or whatever. Like
Yeah.
anything you can point to that's supposed to be the thing.
Yeah. But there's a better objection. I think it's coming our way now against the chromosomal view.
It sounds like they would have to bite the bullet in some way, right? They would either have to say,
What
well,
bullet?
No, sex is not a concept, it just kind of
Not a
back
bullet at
to
all, is it?
definition.
Because it isn't.
Or they would have to accept, no, some people can change their sex, or at least it may come to a point where a person is more male than female or more female than male.
Spectrum concept.
What
Yeah.
if we discovered a way of triggering a sort of cascade effect in the chromosomes? I mean, I have no idea how this would happen.
Okay, so there we just got more about whether sex change is possible, and I don't actually know your view on this. Do
Whether
you think it
sex
is?
change is absolutely not.
Okay, what strength is the necessity there? You mean like absolutely metaphysically impossible?
Biologically.
Biologically, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Let's
guess I
a
agree.
bit this morning in our discussions, right? Because there were the philosophers who were like, swamp, like the audience is not going to know Swamp Man, but what if this person just appeared with this kind of body, like out of
A swamp.
just or
Lightning.
a strike of lightning, and then there's just this person with this body like this, but they don't have the developmental history, or they're not part of a species lineage. Yeah, I think our questions about sex, and as they plug into the current politics, they are biological questions, right?
Mhm.
And they have a politicized implication, but
Yeah.
they're not metaphysical questions.
Okay.
I don't.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wonder if the people are talking past each other in this debate, because like words like possible and impossible and can and must are notoriously kind of context sensitive, and it depends on like what assumptions you're evaluating the claim in light of as to whether they're going to come out as true or false. So if I ask you like, can you buy an Aston Martin right now? I'll just answer it for myself. No, I cannot do that. Because what I'm assuming is certain facts about my financial situation, right? Like given my financial situation, no, I cannot buy an Aston Martin. But if somebody clarified, like, no, I just mean like, is it legal for you or something like that? Then I'd say, oh yeah, then
dealerships or whatever.
then I certainly can.
Yeah.
So if it's clear that I'm in a context where we're talking about what's legally possible, then I'm going to erase facts about my financial situation. So similarly, if I ask like, can a person change sex? I think some people in the debate are hearing that as asking like, given the biological facts of the matter and the technology available to us right now, is sex change possible? Certainly not. And I guess I'm in that camp.
Yeah.
I'm in that camp. Yeah, not even
And
close.
maybe knowing something about why the question's being asked. Like if there
Oh,
was
yeah,
no
that's
debate
right.
and we're just in the philosophy seminar room and someone says, we're talking about conceivability, that's often going on in Film Mind or whatever, right? Like we just
Yeah.
want to know what is, like, yeah, can there be like zombies that behave exactly as humans behave but are not conscious or whatever?
Yeah.
If we're just entertaining mere conceivability, that's a whole other question, right? But this
Yeah.
debate, the questions about sex change and what sex is are being asked because of the claim that trans women are women.
Are actually changing sex. People are actually changing sex.
People
Yeah.
think that taking hormones,
Yeah.
people out there think, people, not all of them, but there's a common folk view, right, that sex is hormones and that hormones change by taking like you can take endogenous hormones to change your hormone levels, and whatever changes that will produce in like the expression of your fat distribution and hairiness and whatever is change of sex. That's a view that
Yeah.
some people believe in, and that's what's on the table for. So conceivability thought experiments are just like unhelpful as a response to
Yeah.
that, right?
I'm not in the hormone world, but is it when you take artificial hormones or synthetic hormones, is that called exogenous? Because it's like from
Oh,
outside
sorry.
your body? And endogenous, I thought is like
Endogenous comes from
like
in,
indigenous
and
means you're like
did I say endogenous?
yeah, I don't,
Oh, sorry.
okay.
No, it's
That's all right.
absolutely right. Exogenous.
Yeah, I've certainly heard people say like you can change your sex by changing your hormones and
Yeah.
by changing your physical appearance and having surgeries and
And I think because those people often believe in sexed brains, like they already believe that there are male and female brains. And then they think because the hormones can really change your brain,
oh, I
like,
see.
oh, okay, that's a real transformation. And now you've got the one like the other guys.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it sounded like actually Sophie might have thought that there are different kinds of sex when we got the list of like, well, somebody can be phenotypically female, but not genetically female or gametically female. Those sorts of people, which is a pretty common view, and that's one of the views I'm trying to address in this thing I'm working on now. Those people tend to think that you can change some of those so that you can become male in some ways.
yeah.
Even if you started out as female in every way, you can become male in some ways. And I guess that would count as becoming more male. So maybe that's the view that's underneath the surface here. But I guess I would just also add, maybe you've noticed this too, but I think something that might be influencing people's thoughts on this matter is even referring to the products of these cosmetic surgeries as like vaginas or
yeah.
penises.
Yeah.
Because those are like functional concepts, and
Right.
yeah, I don't think that's what you're getting as a result of these surgeries. You're getting something that appears to be, to some degree, a penis or a vagina or whatever.
But this is
But I think
where
it's incorrect to
mind
actually.
blowing. So they're absolutely right from a sort of biological point of view. Like, what was that thing built? What's the sort of like teleology of those body parts or whatever? Or how does that connect to the reproductive system? Or what are these two types of two organisms?
Mhm.
But then what can the feminist maybe has a better answer, right? Like she thinks, well, women has historically been seen as a thing for men to fuck. Trans women can get the thing that allows them to be the thing to fuck. Like it's functional. It's functional in the sense that they can now be like treated as women.
Mhm.
So now it doesn't look so implausible that the change, like the change to the thing that's kind of core to the way that women have been demeaned has happened.
Okay.
So I just think that's sort of interesting. There's something in the ballpark. It's not function in this biological sense, but it's function in the like artifact sense, almost like a toaster toasts,
Uh-huh.
and then there's the pseudo vagina
It's
is recipient.
yeah.
I never say that.
Got it. Trying to think of the PG version.
I know you don't like it when I said I couldn't think of what you said.
Okay.
I don't have any other phrases lined up.
All right, just
I'll
wanted to
just
say
go
that.
thing to bleep.
Yeah. Okay, shall we watch the other species stuff?
It looks like function, actually.
Okay, so yeah, we just talked about other species, and then what Professor Grace Chappell is saying is, it looks like what you want is a function. You think that the sexes are functional concepts because they seem to be Yeah, so this occurred to me too, because I have a little bit of a background in philosophy of mind, but as soon as you realize that a trait is like multiply realizable, then you start thinking functionalism, because that's what motivated functionalism in the philosophy of mind. When you start realizing it looks like other species can experience pain,
Yeah.
but their brains are very different from how our brains are. Like an
Yeah.
octopus brain is very different from our brain, but it looks like an octopus feels pain. So pain must not be identical with any sort of underlying biological structure, but rather it's like the way that some underlying structure functions. It's what it does. Okay, so that's what motivated functionalism in the philosophy of mind. And it looks like if you reflect on the fact that there are males and females in other species that are physically very different from us, then what must make an organism male or female? It must be some sort of function that they have, a reproductive function. Okay, so yeah, Jason and Sophie have discovered that. They kind of happened upon it. Okay, and then just when Sophie was about to state the definition, things go awry, and then we end up beating up on a straw man.
Would be a better thing to go for. If that's the game you're playing, you want something that is the same in all species, that makes them male and female. Then
Great.
Reproductive function. So you could say something like, well, the males are the ones that produce the small gamete, the females are the ones that produce the large gamete.
Yeah, just end right there. Just stop right there. So close. Okay, but here's where it goes wrong.
Actually goes, yeah.
That do the gestation.
Oh no, that was the problem. And the females are the ones that do the gestation. Okay, and then we're gonna get objections about how seahorses. Yeah. Okay.
Damn it.
And then that was the response to that view. So yeah, unfortunately, we tacked on that second conjunct there. Like to be female is to produce the larger gamete and do the gestating, and then all the objections were to the gestation bit. And I
I wonder where he's getting that tacked on bit from.
yeah, well, I think it might be Aristotle. I think that was Aristotle's view, actually. Like
Well,
there
that
had to
would
be
be
some
good, yeah.
gestation
Given
going on.
he works in that stuff, right?
Yeah, so that it
makes
may
sense.
have been an Aristotle connection there.
I see.
Yeah, somebody once floated that by me, like, why don't you like Aristotle's definition? And it was something about gestation. Females are the ones that gestate. And so of course you get seahorses, and I guess it's also mentioned in this video that some fish like gestate eggs, some male fish gestate eggs in their mouth. I guess that happens. But there's also a whole lot of species that don't gestate eggs at all. There's just like external fertilization and then they're on their own, right? There's a huge number of species like that.
Yeah.
So there's just no gestation at all.
Yeah.
So don't add that on to the definition. Rather,
Maybe
yeah, we would have been a lot closer with just the functions.
we could just go to, where is it, 2730, and just if you have a reaction to this claim.
2730.
This is the thing about being anti-theory that I just can't understand how a philosopher can be anti-theory. Like, what's his job?
So I'm an anti-theorist. I have a book called Epiphanies. Well, I have 3 books: Ethics and Experience, and Knowing What to Do, and Epiphanies are all strongly anti-moral theory. In all of them, I'm saying, well, you can't get a nice, neat, tidy theory of what you should do. When you feed in here the situation, circumstances C, at this end you crank the handle, and out at that end comes the action recommendation, and it's consequentialism or Kantianism or something that does this machine in the middle. And I reject that kind of approach. I say, no, we don't want and we don't need a moral theory in that tight systematic sense. And so when I come to transgender, I'm doing 2 things that other trans philosophers probably don't do. First of all, I'm really interested in the history. And secondly, I'm actively anti-theory. So a lot of my good friends who work in trans philosophy, they say, right, we need a theory of trans. We need a philosophical theory of what trans is. And I'm saying, well, hold on a minute. You don't need theories elsewhere in laws of ethics. Why do we need one here?
I mean, do you think he's saying, am I taking him to be saying something more than he is? Is he just saying, of course you need concepts and of course you need principles. You just don't need this systematizing thing that ties them together and unifies them, the grand theory, the systematic theory. Because that I could get more on board with that claim. But if the claim is like, we need no coherent concepts, we need no principles, we need no story of unification.
Yeah.
Indeed, why are we even reading books at all? Like, what?
Well, I haven't read any of this work about anti-theory, and that sounds really strong to say I'm an anti-theorist. Because I would have thought the right view is just to what I heard and what I think maybe is underneath the surface here is I don't know if you've read this, but Roderick Chisholm's The Problem of the Criterion. Have you read this? Okay. So it's people in epistemology really like it. It's pretty famous in epistemology, I guess. So what Chisholm says there is there's like two ways you might approach a philosophical problem. And one is you might, so if somebody asks you a question like, should I throw the lever in a trolley case or something like that? Trolley's coming down the road, it's going to hit 5 people unless I throw the lever and divert it to kill 1.
Yep.
Should I throw the lever? Okay, there's 2 ways you might approach that. One is you can start applying theories, and maybe you've seen this in classes when I teach ethics. I have some students who are like, well, if you're a utilitarian, here's what you'll do.
Yeah.
So they'll like consult a theory and see what the theory says, and then form their judgment on the basis of the theory.
Because they subscribe, it's not conditional. They
Yeah,
are
it's because
utilitarian.
it sounds like they are utilitarians,
Right,
and so
they
they just
provide
ask the
that.
theory and they say, here's what the theory tells me to do. So I'm ready.
Yeah.
So Chisholm calls that methodism because you start with a method or you start with a criterion and say, here's my criterion of goodness or rightness, and here's what it tells me to do. So he calls that methodism. The alternative view is to consult your intuitions, I guess, be a rationalist and think that we have rational intuitions and make a particular judgment about the case and say, in this case, it strikes me as obvious that it is permissible to throw the lever. So that's what I think is, those are the moral facts of the case. And then what you try to do is evaluate theories in light of how well they explain the particular judgments that you're making. And that's kind of how we do science, right? We like make observations and then try to formulate theories that explain the observations.
Absolutely, but that's not anti-theory, is
It's
it?
not
It's just the
anti-theory.
order
Yeah,
of-
it's the order, right?
Yeah.
And the worry about Methodism is, well, Chisholm's worry about Methodism is, or starting with a theory, is it seems arbitrary as to why you chose that theory.
Yes,
Yeah,
unless
so
you had independent
unless you
good
had,
reason. Yeah.
unless you believed it on the basis of previous particular judgments, and then you
Yes.
really just are a particularist. But if instead you're like, I just choose this theory and now it's telling me to throw the lever,
Right, why? Yeah.
yeah, then it's sort of arbitrary why you would start with this theory rather than some other. Okay, so that's the objection to Methodism. And if that's what Sophie is
But you would
saying,
not
then
call that
I
anti-theory.
wouldn't call it anti-theory. No, it's just an
No.
order of
It
operations
sounds
kind of
to
thing.
me
Yeah.
like Sophie was saying, you know who you are, you don't need anyone's permission.
Yeah.
Why is there even theorizing about this thing?
Yeah.
And then, so one thing is like whether or not we need any of this work, gender critical or trans inclusive feminist philosophy work at all
Yeah.
about trans, like should that even be a subject? But the other thing I just thought was that it's just sheer self-undermining for an academic philosophy faculty member at a university in the UK to be anti-theory, because
Yeah.
what's he contributing otherwise?
Yeah.
Because it's theory that we do, unless it's less than theory, but it's part of theory, concepts and principles. And maybe then you could say, I'm contributing scholarship. I'm reading Aristotle and telling you, or
Yeah.
whoever he reads the medievals or whatever, like, and I'm just telling you what they say.
Yeah.
That's not quite theory building because it's not original, right? It's like interpretive and fighting about the doctrine and
Yeah.
but or what? Like what?
Yeah. Well, certainly it would be, I hadn't thought of this before, but I think what I heard in your comment there was it looks like there's a self-defeat problem. If you took a really strong view and you were like, I'm against any theory anywhere ever. And then if you ask why, you get reasons, like here's why. That's a theory, right? Like that's a theory. Anti-theory is a theory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's not what I had in mind. I
Yeah.
just had in mind that he's a philosopher and he
Yeah,
can
I think-
undermine his own job.
Right. I think you were saying surely there are other parts of the job that would require having theories, but
Yeah.
I was just thinking like,
Yeah,
but
it's
anti-theory itself
self-defeating.
is a theory,
That's
right?
true.
Like,
Like the postmodern critique of postmodernism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even if you said, I'm just in the business of interpretation, if that's like a principle that you abide by and say like, that's what we should do, like that's the proper way to do
Right.
philosophy historically,
There's rules of
that's a theory.
interpretation.
Yeah, that's a theory. So maybe the view is more subtle and we should actually read this work to see what anti-theory really is, but a kind of flat-footed service level reading looks like there's going to be a threat of self-defeat.
And it just seems to
Yeah.
me, I mean, I'm maybe channeling like Firestone here because she was really defending theory against the feminist grassroots anti-theory people. That's part of a politics that like these people they think theory is elitist and stupid and it's an abstraction from the real. And she's saying like, no, you really need a roadmap Like you can't have a movement that doesn't know what its goals are and doesn't have a clear sense of its principles. And I think I've definitely experienced that in gender critical stuff, that like you actually really need your academics working out the concepts, and
Yeah.
there has been an evolution of ideas, and
Yeah.
theory is actually quite important for
Yeah.
a lot of what we're doing. So
Yeah. Especially if you hold principles like trans women are women,
Right.
or here are my views on trans rights. You have these views that are, I don't know if they count as theories, but they're certainly like general principles.
Right.
And if people are objecting to those principles
Right.
and saying like they're false or they contradict each other,
You
it's
have to
really
have
unsatisfying to
reasons.
just say, well, I'm anti-theory. So
Or just stump the table. I
Yeah.
have these principles because I have them.
Yeah.
Should you have them? I couldn't possibly say.
Yeah.
And it's also
Right.
clear that they want you to share their principles, those activists.
Yeah.
So they need to give some public reasons.
I guess that's why you'd go on a podcast to like share some of your views and defend them and offer what I'd say it's a kind of theorizing that's happening, and rightly so, because in the face of objections,
Yeah,
you gotta like come up with some principles and replies. And
that's true. I mean, they were there together having the discussion. And I think Jason is a philosopher. So it's two philosophers having a discussion about trans and sex gender issues.
yeah.
And then just at this particular odd moment, Sophie asserts anti-theory, which is, I found that really strange. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say one more thing. So even as a particularist, like when I'm running these trolley problems by my students, you can start getting them worried. Like in a room 305 case, can a doctor kill one innocent person, harvest the organs, and save 5 others? Most people say no, don't kill one to save 5. That's really bad. Okay, trolley lever case, can you throw the lever, kill one, and save 5? And they're like, yeah, that would be okay. And most of them can feel the burden that is now on them to like explain this and
Yeah.
like reconcile what seem to be contradictory views. And not one in my whole history of teaching has ever said, I don't need a theory or something.
Right.
Like, I just
sit
have
with
these
this for comfort.
judgments and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I guess philosophy exists. So it's part of the reason why philosophy exists, to help diffuse this tension that we often have between beliefs that appear to be contradictory. Yeah, so I guess we should read the anti-theory stuff and
We probably
see how
should.
deep it goes.
Maybe it's
But
much more sophisticated than we give credit for.
but
Yay.
I guess we can just agree that a little bit of theorizing is helpful.
Yeah.
And
I certainly think
that's
so.
why we're doing this right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice to do this in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice having you here. This is my office, by the way. So
Very nice.
thanks for coming. Yeah, there's no window, but it's only one escape. Okay, thanks for coming.
Creepy way to end.
Yes.
I'll be murdered, but this will be released by Pepperdine University. When
Yeah.
Thomas is in jail.
Unless it's like sequestered as evidence or something. Everything's gonna be fine. Maybe we can just cut the last bit out. Yeah, we'll just cut the last bit out. Okay.
We won't though.